The auction block was cold beneath my bare feet. It was always cold in Calvaris, a bitter, unnatural chill that the eternally burning street lamps only mocked. They said the capital was forged from obsidian and gold, but I had only ever seen the soot. I had been sold twice before, but this was the high block, beneath the black gaze of the Pyre King's citadel. This was where the Empire's most coveted prizes were paraded. And this was where hope went to be incinerated. I kept my eyes down, my long, ash-colored hair hiding the defiant jut of my chin. The auctioneer's voice droned on, listing my qualities as if I were a horse. 16 years, untouched, strong. Full teeth and clear eyes. A docile temperament, perfect for the inner court. Liar. I was anything but docile. I was just quiet. Quiet was how you survived. My world was ash, my future a handful of dust. I was a casualty, a forgotten number in a crumbling empire. If you too know what it's like to feel invisible, to scream without making a sound, then follow my story on Shadowsong Stories. You'll understand the silence. And you'll understand the fire that came after. The bidding began. A merchant from the outer provinces, his voice oily. A noblewoman with a laugh like shattering glass, no doubt looking for a new plaything for her masked courtiers. My skin crawled. I'd rather serve in the sulfur mines than in that den of vipers. 100 gold pieces, the auctioneer cried. 150. My stomach tightened into a knot of ice. I focused on the sounds beyond the square, the hiss of the molten rivers surrounding the citadel, the distant, mournful cry of a screehawk. Anything but the voices deciding my fate. Then, silence fell. It wasn't a gradual quiet. It was sudden, as if a god had pressed a heavy thumb against the world, snuffing out all sound. The auctioneer's voice cracked and died. The crowd, once a jeering, murmuring beast, went utterly still. I risked a glance upward. He stood at the back of the square, cloaked in shadows, yet the eternal flames of the city seemed to bend toward him, casting his features in a terrifying dance of light and darkness. He was a creature of myth, a walking contradiction. Obsidian-black armor clung to him like a second skin, and a high-collared cloak, the color of dried blood, framed a face of brutal, chilling beauty. Lucian Vale. The Pyre King. He did not walk. He materialized. The crowd parted for him, people physically recoiling, their faces pale with a terror that went beyond respect. This was the man who ruled Calvaris, the man who commanded the flames that burned traitors in the streets. They called him the fire god in flesh, and he had not been seen at a public auction in a decade. His eyes, the color of burning gold, scanned the block. They passed over the other trembling girls and settled on me. There was no warmth in his gaze. There was nothing. It was the void, the cold space between stars. But I felt it, a physical weight, a pressure against my skin, as if his stare was a tangible thing. The auctioneer, shaking so hard I could see the wooden gavel rattle in his hand, stammered, "Why, your majesty? An unexpected honor. The bid stands at 150 gold for this one." Lucian Vale did not move. He did not raise a hand. His voice when it came was not loud, but it cut through the square and echoed off the citadel walls. It was a voice like cooling lava, deep, rough, and final. 1,000. The noblewoman who had bid against him made a small, strangled sound and nearly fainted. The merchant was already backing away, disappearing into the crowd. The auctioneer didn't even try for another bid. He slammed the gavel down, the sound cracking through the silence. Sold. To His Imperial Majesty, the Pyre King. Lucian Vale turned, his cloak sweeping the obsidian stone, and vanished back into the shadows from which he had come. He didn't wait for his purchase. He didn't have to. A guard with a face like scarred rock stomped onto the platform. He didn't use chains. He grabbed my arm, his armored fingers digging into my bicep, and shoved me toward the citadel. As he did, he pressed a heated brand against the nape of my neck. I didn't scream. I wouldn't give them the satisfaction. But the searing pain, the smell of my own burning flesh, was the final punctuation. The cold numbness that had protected me finally shattered, and a single, hot tear carved a clean path through the soot on my cheek. My name is Elen. I am 16 years old. And I belong to the Pyre King. Chapter 1. The Mark and the Whisper. My neck was a line of fire, a searing promise of ownership that pulsed with every beat of my terrified heart. The guard didn't drag me, he marched me, his grip on my arm a vice, pulling me from the auction block and through the great obsidian gates of the Kelvaris citadel. I had only ever seen the citadel from the slums, a jagged black crown piercing the perpetually smoggy sky. Up close, it was a monument to terror and beauty. We crossed a bridge over one of the molten rivers, the heat clinging to my thin tunic, the air thick with the smell of sulfur and something metallic, like hot blood. The eternal flames in the street lamps here weren't the flickering, pathetic lights of the city, they were roaring pillars of blue and orange, caged in gold, illuminating the sheer, polished walls. I heard it then, beneath the hiss of the flames, a low, rhythmic screaming from deep within the rock. The prompt settings dungeons were real. I flinched, and the guard shoved me harder. "Keep moving," Pyre marked. He didn't take me to the opulent halls I'd heard whispers of. He shoved me through a low-arched doorway, down a spiral of servants' stairs, and into the belly of the fortress. The inner court was a lie, the true court was here, in the cold, damp corridors where servants walked with their heads bowed, their faces pale and haunted. A woman with a face like cured leather was waiting for us. She was tall, rail-thin, and wore the grey, high-collared dress of a high-ranking servant. Her eyes, the color of slate, raked over me with a mixture of pity and contempt. "This is the one?" she asked, her voice dry as tinder. The guard grunted. "Marked and delivered." He released my arm, shoving me forward so I stumbled onto the stone floor. He left without another word, the clang of the heavy door sealing my fate. I scrambled to my feet, my chin rising instinctively. The woman's lip curled. "Defiance. That will be the first thing he burns out of you." She circled me, her gaze lingering on the raw, weeping brand on my neck. "I am Mistress Varya. You are no longer Elen. You are no longer anything. You are a tool. You belong to the Pyre King. You will live in this room, you will not speak to anyone, and you will obey my commands. Is that understood?" "Yes, mistress," I whispered, the word scraping my throat. "You are assigned to the king's domain," she said flatly. A younger girl, who had been silently scrubbing a pot in the corner, dropped it with a clatter. Varya didn't even look at her. The girl just whimpered, grabbed the pot, and fled the room. Varya's cold eyes returned to me. "It seems you are special. He has not requested a new servant for his personal quarters in over a year." What happened to the last one?" I dared to ask. Varya's expression didn't change, but a flicker of something, true primal fear, passed through her eyes. She was found in the West Tower, staring at the sun. She was blind, deaf, and screaming. She died 3 days later. My blood turned to ice. "And the one before that?" "Scorched to the bone in a locked room," Varya said, as if discussing the weather. "Lucien Vale is not a kind master. He is not a master at all. He is a curse. A grief given form. You will be his shadow, and shadows that get too close are consumed." She grabbed my chin, forcing my head up. "Listen to me, girl, if you wish to see tomorrow. The rules for serving in the king's domain are absolute. First, you do not speak to him. Ever. Not unless he commands it. Second, you do not look him in the eye. He is your king, your god. You are the dirt beneath his boot. Third, you will never, under any circumstances, touch him. His skin. It is not like ours. And fourth, the most important rule of all, you do not show weakness. You do not cry. You do not flinch. You do not show fear. He despises it. He incinerates it." She released me, her point made. "Why?" I whispered, rubbing my jaw. "Why me? He paid 1,000 gold for me. What does he want?" "He wants nothing," Varya said, turning to a stack of folded linens. "He buys what catches his eye, and he forgets it just as quickly. You were a moment's distraction. Your job is to remain a distraction. Tidy his quarters. Bring his wine. Disappear into the stone. You are a ghost, girl. The moment you remind him you are a person, you are dead." For 3 days, I was a ghost. I lived in a 4 by 6 stone cell with a straw mattress. I scrubbed floors in the silent corridors, my hands raw, my neck a constant, dull ache. The other servants avoided me. The pyre mark on my neck was a warning, a plague sign. The nobles I passed, their beautiful, cruel faces hidden behind masks of gold and porcelain, would see the mark and hurry away, as if my proximity to the king was a contagion. I was the loneliest I had ever been. On the fourth night, the summons came. It wasn't a shout. It was a bell. A single, deep toll that didn't just ring, it vibrated in my teeth, in the marrow of my bones. I was asleep, and the sound jolted me awake. Mistress Varya was standing in my doorway, a silver tray in her hands. Her face was the color of ash. "He is in his domain," she said, her voice trembling. "He has requested wine." She thrust the tray at me. On it sat a single, elegant black bottle and a golden goblet. "The rules, girl," Varya whispered, her eyes wide with terror. "Remember the rules. Do not speak. Do not look. Do not touch. And do not, for the love of the gods, fear him." My hands were shaking so hard the goblet rattled against the tray. I clamped it down, my knuckles white. "Go," she breathed, shoving me into the hall. "West Tower. Top floor. The guards will let you in." The walk was the longest of my life. The citadel was silent, the eternal flames casting long, dancing shadows that looked like grasping hands. The air grew warmer with every step I took, the stone beneath my thin shoes radiating a dry, oppressive heat. I reached the West Tower. 2 guards stood there, not in the shining black armor of the King's Guard, but in heavy, scorched plates that looked like they had been through a forge. They were trembling. One of them saw the tray and my brand. He didn't speak. He just fumbled with a large iron key, unlocked the most terrifying door I had ever seen, a slab of blackened, heat-warped steel, and unbarred it. He hauled the door open, the sound a low groan of metal. He didn't invite me in. He shoved me. The tray clattered in my hands. The heat hit me like a physical blow, stealing the air from my lungs. The door boomed shut behind me, the bar dropping with a sound of utter finality. I was in the Pyre King's domain. The room was vast, a circular chamber with a ceiling so high it was lost in shadows. And it was on fire. It wasn't burning. It was alight. Flames, white and gold, licked the obsidian walls, clinging to the stone like ivy, casting no smoke. They danced along the drapes of a massive 4-poster bed, across the spines of books on a shelf, over the surface of a polished table. They were silent, beautiful, and utterly terrifying. And in the center of the room, standing before a towering window that overlooked the burning city, was Lucien Vale. His back was to me. He was just as I remembered, tall, imposing, a silhouette of black armor and dark cloak. He was perfectly still. I remembered Varya's words. "Do not speak. Do not look. Do not flinch." My heart was a trapped bird, beating itself to death against my ribs. I forced my feet to move, one step at a time, across the heated marble. The only sound was the faint click of the goblet on the tray. I approached his left side, my eyes fixed firmly on the floor. I could feel the heat rolling off him, a living, breathing furnace. I stopped, as Varya had instructed, 3 paces from him. I bent my knees, lowering the tray. And then he moved. He didn't turn. He just spoke. His voice was a low rumble, the sound of an avalanche in a distant mountain. "You're the new one." I froze, my body rigid. He spoke to me. "What do I do?" "Let's see," he murmured, still not looking at me. "How long you last." He turned. I broke the rule. I couldn't help it. My head snapped up. I saw his face. And I saw his hand. His face was a tragedy. Younger than I expected, with sharp cheekbones and a cruel, beautiful mouth. But his golden eyes were a storm of such profound, ancient grief that I almost choked on it. He wasn't looking at me. He was looking at his own hand. His left gauntlet was off. And his bare hand was on fire. A perfect, bright flame encased his fingers, dancing over his palm, casting his grieving face in a terrible golden light. He was staring at his own burning hand, and he whispered, his voice cracking with a pain so deep it vibrated through me. "It's not enough. It's never enough." Chapter 2: The Silent Watch. I was a stone. I was a pillar of salt. My blood had frozen, my breath trapped in my chest. His whisper, "It's never enough," echoed in the vast, silent, burning room, a confession not meant for me, or perhaps for anyone. He was still staring at his own fiery hand, his golden eyes a sea of torment. I had seen the Pyre King, not the god, not the monster, but the man, and he was breaking. "Do not show fear. He incinerates it." Varya's words were a frantic drumbeat against the inside of my skull. I was terrified, but the sight of his agonizing, lonely grief, it held me in a different kind of trap. It wasn't just fear. It was a terrible, aching pity. My silence, my stillness, finally broke his trance. His head snapped toward me. The grief was gone, snuffed out like a candle. In its place was the void. The cold, ancient, furious power I had seen at the auction block. The flames on the walls brightened, flaring from gold to a blinding white blue, the heat intensifying until it stung my skin. His burning hand remained unclenched at his side, but his other, gauntlet hand slowly rose and pointed at my face. "You," he breathed. The word was not a question. It was a condemnation. He moved toward me, not walking but gliding, a shadow given form. "You were told," he whispered, his voice a low vibration that I felt in my bones, "not to look." He stopped, towering over me. I was a mouse, and he was the shadow of a hawk, and I was so very small. He was close enough now that I could feel the impossible heat from his body, yet a cold dread rolled off him in waves. The flames from his hand cast dancing, demonic shadows across his perfect, cruel face. "They all break," he murmured, his golden eyes raking over me, searching for the crack. "They all scream. Or faint. Or plead. They remind me of what I am." He leaned closer, his voice dropping to a terrifying intimacy. "What do you see, little ghost?" My entire body was a single, agonizing tremor. The tray in my hands shook, the goblet rattling a frantic rhythm against the silver. I had to stop it. I had to survive. I had no defiance. I had no strength. I had only the memory of his broken whisper. I did not speak. I did not run. My eyes, which had been locked on his, slowly, deliberately, dropped to the floor. I broke his gaze, not in terror, but in a willed act of submission. A silent answer. "You are my king. I am the dirt." Then, with a strength I did not know I possessed, I forced my shaking limbs to obey. I bent my knees, sinking into a low, graceful curtsy. I lowered the silver tray and placed it on the obsidian floor at his feet. The metal hissed as it touched the hot stone. I did not rise. I stayed there, head bowed, neck bared, offering him the brand he had paid for. I offered him my obedience, my silence, my fear, all of it. I just hid it. The silence stretched. The flames on the walls roared, the only sound in the chamber. I could feel his gaze on the top of my head, a physical weight, a burning pressure. I could feel his confusion. He was waiting for the scream. I gave him nothing. A long, shuddering breath left him. It was a sound of profound weariness, of disgust. "Get out." The words were rough, final. I didn't look up. I rose, my legs feeling like water, and I backed away, step by agonizing step. When I reached the door, I fumbled for the latch, my hand finding the heavy iron bar. I lifted it, pulled the massive door open just enough to slip through, and fled. I didn't run. I walked. I walked until I was out of the west tower, out of the sight of the scorched guards. I walked until I reached the servants' spiral stair. And then I collapsed. My body folded, my back sliding down the cold stone wall until I was a heap on the floor. The shaking started, so violent it blurred my vision. My teeth chattered, a painful, rattling sound in the quiet passage. I wrapped my arms around my knees, burying my face, and finally, I let the terror out in a series of silent, ragged gasps. I had survived. I had faced the Pyre King in his domain, seen his curse, and I had survived. I didn't know how long I sat there, a trembling knot of linen and fear. A pair of worn boots stopped in front of me. I looked up. It was Mistress Varya. Her face was a mask of pure, stunned disbelief. She had clearly expected to find my cell empty, to hear the news of my incineration by morning. She stared at me, her eyes wide, as if I truly were a ghost. "You're alive," she whispered, the words filled with a strange hollow awe. I could only nod, my throat too tight to speak. She didn't offer a hand. She didn't offer comfort. She just stared for a moment longer, then her expression hardened back into its familiar mask of command. "He will summon you again tomorrow," she said, her voice flat. "Do not be late." She turned and walked away, her footsteps echoing in the dark. And so, my new life began. I was the ghost in the machine. Every night, at the same hour, the bone-deep bell would toll. Every night, I would take the silver tray with the black bottle of wine. I would walk to the West Tower. The scorched guards would unbar the door, their expressions a mix of fear and a new grudging respect. I would enter the burning room. He was always there, standing by the window. Sometimes his hand was on fire, sometimes it was just a man's hand. I never knew which it would be. I never looked. I would walk to the table, my eyes on the floor. I would set down the tray, pour the wine into the goblet, and back away to a small alcove near the door, where a single stone stool waited for me. And I would sit. I was his silent watch. He would not dismiss me. I was to stay. Sometimes for an hour, sometimes for 6. I would sit, my hands clasped in my lap, my back straight, and I would listen. I would listen to the silent crackle of the flames on the walls. I would listen to the wind howling outside, a lonely sound. And I would listen to him. He never spoke to me. He never looked at me. He would stand by the window, or pace the room, or, on rare occasions, sit in a high-backed chair and stare into the flames. But I would hear him. I would hear him breathe. Sometimes it was a steady, controlled breath. Other times, it was the ragged, agonizing breath of a man holding himself together by a thread. I would hear him clench his gauntlet fist, the sound of leather and metal groaning. I was his witness. A piece of furniture that could hear. Weeks passed. The fear didn't leave, but it changed. It settled into my bones, becoming a dull ache, a companion. I learned the sound of his footsteps. I learned to tell, by the color of the flames on the walls, bright gold for calm, white blue for agitation, what kind of night it would be. A strange, terrifying, and utterly silent bond was forming. He was the center of my world, the burning, grieving sun I was forced to orbit. And I was the one thing in his life that did not burn. I was the one thing that did not break. I was the one thing that stayed. One night, the air was different. The flames on the walls were a deep, angry crimson, a color I had never seen. The heat was suffocating. I entered, set down the wine, and retreated to my stool. Lucien was not at the window. He was pacing, a caged lion, his movements sharp, violent. His gauntlet was on, his hand clenched. He was muttering to himself, the words too low to hear, but the fury in them made the air vibrate. An hour passed. 2. The crimson flames licked higher. I could hear his teeth grinding. Suddenly he roared, a sound of pure, unadulterated rage, and he slammed his gauntlet fist into the obsidian wall. The wall cracked. A spiderweb of fissures raced from the point of impact. The entire tower shuddered. He stood there, his chest heaving, his fist still against the stone. I did not flinch. I did not move. My heart was in my throat, but I sat on my stool, a perfect, silent ghost. He turned his head. His golden eyes, burning with a red light, found me in the alcove. He stared at me, breathing hard. He was daring me to react. I just met his gaze. I didn't mean to. It just happened. I held his stare for 1, 2, 3 seconds. I did not scream. I did not look away. He snarled, a low, animalistic sound, and turned back to the window. The crimson flames slowly, faded back to gold. He dismissed me an hour later, not with a word, but with a sharp, jerking gesture of his hand. I fled. I fled back to my room, my heart pounding with a new, strange emotion. It wasn't just fear. It was something else. Something terrifyingly like connection. I was almost to the servants' stairs, my mind lost in the crimson flames, when I heard it. A sound. A scrape. A soft sound, like leather on stone, from a dark corridor to my right. I froze. No one was allowed in the West Tower but the king, his guards, and me. I pressed myself into the shadows, my heart stopping. A figure slipped out of the corridor. It was not a guard. He was dressed in black, soft leathers, his face hidden by a shadow cloth. He moved with a liquid grace, a hunter. And in his hand, he held a crossbow, the bolt tipped with a strange milky green glass. He was moving, silent as death, toward the Pyre King's door. Chapter 3. The Price of a Shadow. My world narrowed to 2 points, the silent, deadly shape moving down the hall, and the massive barred door he was moving toward. He'll kill him. The thought was a spike of ice in my gut. And my second thought was even more terrifying. I can't let him. Various rules were a cage I had lived in for weeks. Do not speak. Do not look. Do not touch. Be a ghost. Ghosts don't interfere. Ghosts don't scream. Ghosts let men in black leathers, carrying crossbows tipped with glowing green glass, murder their masters. But I wasn't a ghost. Not anymore. I was the silent watch. I had sat in his room, night after night, and I had listened. I had heard his grief, his rage, his unbearable loneliness. I had seen the man, not the monster. And in that moment, all the rules, all the fear, all of Varya's warnings, turned to ash. The assassin was 10 paces from the door. He was raising the crossbow. I didn't have time to find the guards. I didn't have time to think. I only had time to act. I lunged from the shadows, my bare feet slapping against the cold stone. I ran, not away, but back to the Pyre King's door. No. I screamed, my voice raw from disuse. I grabbed the heavy iron bar and yanked it up, the metal groaning in protest. The assassin whirled, his head snapping toward me. I saw his eyes widen behind the shadow cloth, a flash of pure shock. He hadn't known I was there. He was fast. He was a professional. He didn't hesitate. He swung the crossbow not at me, but at the door I was frantically trying to open. I heaved the door open a foot, just enough to see inside, just enough to scream a single word. Lucien. I saw him. He was standing by the window, his back to me, frozen. He had heard my first scream. He was turning, his golden eyes wide, not with fury, but with stunned confusion. Master! I shrieked, shoving the door wider. The thwang of the crossbow string cut through the air. The assassin hadn't aimed at Lucien. He had aimed at the moving shadow in the doorway. He had aimed at me. Time stopped. I saw the bolt, a blur of black wood and milky, glowing green. I saw Lucien's face, his expression shifting from confusion to a dawning, terrible understanding. I saw the bolt cross the threshold. I didn't have time to move. I only had time to feel it. It hit me. Square in the chest. There was no pain. It was cold. An impossible, agonizing cold that wasn't just on my skin, but inside my blood, my bones. It was the cold of the void, the cold I had felt rolling off Lucien, but 1,000 times worse. It was a magic designed to extinguish. It was a poison of pure, unadulterated ice, and it was aimed at my heart. I stumbled backward, my hand flying to my chest. My fingers brushed the fletching of the bolt. And then I met Lucien's eyes. He was staring at me. At the bolt. The world went silent. The roaring flames in the room died, guttering into nothing in a single heartbeat. The heat vanished. The room was plunged into a sudden, oppressive darkness, lit only by the faint, sickly green glow of the bolt embedded in my chest. A single, terrible sound broke the silence. A low, guttural growl. It didn't come from the assassin. It came from Lucien. You. His voice was not human. It was the sound of a mountain breaking, of a forge exploding. My knees buckled. The cold was spreading, numbing my limbs. I pitched forward, collapsing onto the obsidian floor. But the fall never came. He moved. He was no longer a shadow, no longer a man. He was a blur. He crossed the 20 paces from the window to the door in less than a second. He caught me before I hit the ground, his gauntlet arm sweeping around my waist, pulling me against his chest. I was pressed against his armor. I was touching him. And the moment my skin touched his, everything exploded. It wasn't a sound. It was a feeling. The icy, deathly magic from the bolt in my chest collided with the roaring, dormant furnace inside of him. The cold in my veins met his fire. It was agony. It was ecstasy. It was 1,000 souls screaming and 1,000 stars being born. A white-hot light erupted from my chest, following the line of his arm, connecting us. I felt him. I felt his grief, his centuries of rage, his bottomless, burning guilt. And he felt me. My fear, my loneliness, my stubborn, stupid hope. It was a chain. It was a bridge. It was a bond. Forged in an instant, by a magic that had gone terribly, terribly wrong. Or terribly right. I cried out, my back arching, the power of fire and an ice that was tearing me apart. And Lucien roared. It was the roar I had heard in the forge, but 1,000 times worse. It was the sound of a god's grief turned to wrath. He held me with one arm, his armor the only thing keeping me upright. His other hand, his bare, burning hand, lifted. The assassin was standing in the doorway, frozen, his face a mask of utter horror. He was staring at the light connecting us, at the inferno that was now coiling in Lucien's golden eyes. He fumbled for another bolt, his hands shaking. He was too slow. You, Lucien snarled, his voice a chorus of fire and thunder, dared. He didn't move his hand. He didn't cast a spell. He just willed it. The eternal flames in the corridor, the ones that had been burning for 1,000 years, answered him. They leaped from their sconces. They ripped themselves from the walls. 2 roaring pillars of blue-white fire, sentient and furious, coiled down the hallway like twin serpents. The assassin didn't even have time to scream. The flames struck him. They enveloped him. They lifted him from his feet, his body convulsing as they incinerated him, armor, crossbow, and all, in less than a second. There was a flash, a gout of white-hot light, and then nothing. Not even ash remained. The hallway was silent. The flames retreated, settling back into their sconces as if nothing had happened. The burning room was still dark, the only light the sickly green glow from the bolt in my chest. And then, that light began to flicker. The cold was winning. The numbness was creeping up my neck. My vision was tunneling, the edges of the world going dark. I looked up at Lucien. He was staring at the empty doorway, his chest heaving, his entire body trembling with the aftermath of his power. And then his gaze dropped to me. The rage was gone. The power was gone. All that was left was a raw, naked terror that mirrored my own. His golden eyes locked on the bolt in my chest. His face, which I had only ever seen as a mask of cold fury or distant grief, crumbled. No, he whispered. It was the sound of a man who had just lost the only thing he had left. No, not you. Not you. His gauntlet hand came up, fingers trembling, hovering over the bolt, afraid to touch it, afraid not to. Elen, he choked out my name, the first time he had ever spoken it. I tried to answer. I tried to tell him it was cold. But my lips wouldn't move. The darkness was pulling me under. My last thought, as my eyes fluttered shut and the world dissolved into ice, was that his hand, the one that was made of fire, was so very, very warm. Chapter 4. The String of Fire. Cold. It was a cold that had no source. It was the absence of everything. I was floating in a black, silent void, a speck of dust in an endless, frozen night. I had no body, no name. I was only a thought, and the thought was freezing. I was dead. This was the end. The auction block, the brand, the fear, it had all led to this. A quiet, cold, and utterly lonely oblivion. Elen. A whisper. Not a sound, but a feeling. A thread of impossible, agonizing warmth in the center of the ice. It was distant, a single spark in the suffocating dark. The ice fought it. The cold, ancient magic of the bolt hated the warmth. It swarmed, 1,000 tendrils of frost, trying to snuff out the spark. Live. The whisper came again, louder this time. It wasn't a whisper. It was a command. It was the sound of an avalanche, the rumble of a forge heart. It was his voice. The spark exploded. It wasn't warmth. It was fire. It was pure, liquid agony, a river of magma forcing its way into my frozen veins. The cold had been a peaceful death. This was a violent, scorching life. It burned. It seared the ice from my blood, it scalded the numbness from my limbs, and it centered on my chest, a radiating inferno that was as painful as the bolt had been. I screamed, a raw, tearing sound. The ice shattered. The fire consumed me. And I woke up, gasping, my back arching off a soft surface. My hand flew to my chest. The bolt was gone. In its place, under the torn, blood-soaked fabric of my tunic, my skin was whole. It wasn't burned. It wasn't frozen. It just ached, a deep, profound throb that pulsed in time with my frantic heart. My eyes snapped open. I was not in my cell. I was not in the hall. I was in his bed. A massive, four-poster bed draped in heavy, dark linens that smelled faintly of ash and cedar. The room was dark. The flames that had once danced on the walls were gone, leaving the obsidian stone-cold black and lifeless. The only light came from the towering window, where the eternal fires of the city of Calvaris cast a dim, golden glow. And he was there. Lucien Vale sat in the high-backed chair, not 3 paces from the bed. He wasn't the king. He wasn't the god. He was just a man, slumped in the darkness, watching me. His armor was off. He wore a simple, black tunic, unlaced at the collar. His dark hair was a mess, falling over his brow. His face, in the faint city light, was a mask of utter, bone-deep exhaustion. He looked like he hadn't slept in 1,000 years. He just watched me. His golden eyes, stripped of their fire, were flat, weary, and held a new, terrifying intensity. My voice was a dry rasp. I tried to sit up, but a wave of dizziness and pain slammed me back into the pillows. I'm alive. Yes. His voice was just as raw. It was the first time I had heard it without the undercurrent of fire or rage. It was just a man's voice. Though not for a lack of effort on that bastard's part. What did you do? I whispered, my hand still pressed to my chest. The bolt. It was cold-forged, he said, his gaze dropping to my hand. A godsbane. Divine ice, designed to extinguish me. To extinguish fire. It should have killed you in an instant. It was, I breathed, remembering the void. But then, I felt, you burned me. A muscle in his jaw twitched. He slowly, hesitantly, lifted his left hand. His bare hand. It wasn't on fire. It was just a hand. Pale, long-fingered, and traced with a network of fine, silver scars, as if he'd plunged it into molten glass. It was trembling. I had to, he said, his voice rough with a self-loathing that stunned me. The ice was in your blood. It was crystallizing your heart. I had no choice. I had to force my fire into you. I had to burn it out. He clenched his trembling fist. It seems my curse is the only thing that kept you alive. We stared at each other in the dark, the chasm between us, master and slave, god and ghost, suddenly filled with a terrible, new intimacy. He had been inside me, his magic warring with the poison in my veins. When you caught me, I whispered, my heart hammering. In the hall. I felt something. I felt you. His eyes closed for a second, a flicker of that same profound grief. The bond. I don't know what it is, he said, standing and walking to the window, his back to me. He looked small without his armor, his shoulders slumped. The bolt created a void. A vacuum of ice magic inside you. When I touched you, my fire. It didn't just go to the wound. It rushed into the void. It anchored itself. It tethered us. He pressed his forehead to the cold glass of the window. I can feel you, Elen, he whispered, and the name on his lips was still a shock. Even now. Like a string. A string of fire, tied from my soul to yours. I know you're awake. I know you're in pain. I know you're afraid. He turned, his golden eyes burning in the dim light. And I know you saved my life. The question hung in the air, heavier than the silence. Why? He asked. His voice was not angry. It was raw, confused, desperate. You should have run. You should have let him kill me. I am the monster, the grief-given form. Why would you scream for me? The rules were gone. The fear was still there, a dull throb, but it was overshadowed by the echo of the bond, by the memory of his agony. I owed him the truth. Because I heard you, I said, my voice gaining a small measure of strength. He stilled. Heard me. Here. In this room. For weeks. I pushed myself up onto my elbows. I've been your shadow. I sat on that stool, night after night, and I listened. You never spoke to me. But I heard you. I took a shaky breath. I heard you whisper. I heard you when your hand was on fire and you said it's never enough. I heard you breathing like your heart was breaking. I heard you roar and crack the wall. My voice dropped, the confession tearing from my own throat. I didn't see a monster, Lucien. I saw a man in a cage. A cage of fire and grief, and he was so alone. He stared at me as if I had just plunged a knife into his chest. His beautiful, cruel face twisted, and for a second, I thought he would weep. He had built an empire of terror to keep the world out, and a silent, 40-kilo slave girl had just walked past every single one of his defenses and seen the truth. He took a sharp, ragged breath. He opened his mouth to speak. Knock, knock, knock. A frantic, heavy pounding shattered the moment. It wasn't a polite knock. It was a summons. Your Majesty. A voice cried from the other side of the massive steel door. It was Varya, and she sounded terrified. Your Majesty, you must answer. The council is in chaos. The flames, my lord. The eternal flames in the city are out. Lucien's head snapped toward the door. The exhaustion vanished, replaced by a cold, sharp, and utterly lethal authority. He turned his head and looked at me, still lying in his bed. And in the dark, cold room, the flames on the walls, the ones that had been dead, ignited. They burst to life, not in a crimson rage, but in a sheath of pure, white-hot, controlled fire, illuminating the entire chamber. Let them wait, he commanded, his voice no longer the whisper of a broken man, but the roar of the Pyre King. He strode to the bed, the firelight casting his shadow long and terrible across the floor. He looked down at me, his golden eyes a burning, possessive inferno. You are not a servant, he said, his voice a low, final vow. You are not a ghost. You are mine. And I protect what is mine. I stared up at him, the heat of his presence and his magic washing over me. I wasn't his slave. I wasn't his shadow. I was his anchor. I was his tether. And I had just become the most powerful, and the most hunted person in the entire Pyre Empire. Chapter 5. The King's Anchor. The flames on the walls roared, a white-hot declaration of his returned power. They were no longer the chaotic, grieving fire I had witnessed for weeks. This was different. It was the sound of a forge, of a contained sun. It was the fire of a king. Varya's frantic pounding came again, louder this time, laced with sheer panic. Majesty, please. The city is dark. The people, they are terrified. Lucien did not take his eyes off me. His gaze was a physical weight, a brand all its own, possessive and absolute. He saw the terror in my eyes, the confusion, the pain that still throbbed in my chest. He had declared me his, and in his world, that was a vow stronger than any law. I can't. I stammered, my hand clutching the rich linen of his bed. The council, the flames. You have to. I have to do nothing, he snarled, his voice a low vibration that shook the very air. He strode to the door, but not to open it. He slammed his bare, scarred palm against the blackened steel. Silence, he roared. The pounding stopped. The silence on the other side of the door was so absolute it was as if Varya and the entire citadel had ceased to exist. He turned back to me, his chest heaving. The firelight carved shadows and highlights across his face, making him look like the god king he was pretending to be. But I had seen the man. And I could feel that string. It was a low, steady thrum in my chest, a vibration of warmth that connected me to him. It was a bass line, a constant hum. And beneath it, I could feel the frantic, buzzing rage he was projecting at the door, and the deeper, colder terror he felt for the state of his city. It was a chaotic symphony of his emotions, and it was flooding me. I gasped, my hand going to my chest. I can feel you. His expression faltered. The rage in his eyes softened, replaced by that same, stunned awe from before. He walked back to the bed, not with the glide of a king, but with the hesitant steps of a man treading on thin ice. "What do you feel?" he asked, his voice quiet. "Everything," I whispered, my eyes wide. Your anger at the door. Your fear for the city. It's too much." He knelt beside the bed. The great Pyre King, who incinerated assassins without a thought, knelt beside me, his golden eyes level with mine. The inferno in them was banked, held in check by a will I couldn't comprehend. "Then we learn to shield," he said, as if it were the simplest thing in the world. He raised his scarred, trembling hand, the one that had poured fire into my veins, and hesitated, his fingers hovering inches from my face. "I told them not to touch you," I whispered, the memory of Varya's rule a distant, foolish echo. "I am not them," he murmured. His fingers, impossibly gentle, brushed the hair back from my sweaty temple. The moment his skin touched mine, the chaotic flood of his emotions didn't stop, but it clarified. The rage receded, the fear quieted, and all that was left was the steady, warm thrum of the bond, and a wave of fierce, sharp, and utterly terrifying protectiveness. It was aimed at me. "You feel it, don't you?" he breathed, his gaze locked on mine. "You are my anchor, Elen. For centuries, my fire has been a storm without a center. It has been grief, it has been rage, and it has burned me from the inside out." He moved his hand, his thumb tracing the line of my jaw. "And then you held it. You took the bolt, you linked us, and you gave it a purpose. To save me?" "To protect you," he corrected, his voice hardening. "And in doing so, you saved me. The flames of Calvaris. They are me. When the assassin's ice struck you, my anchor. I was struck. The city went dark because my heart, for a moment, stopped." The weight of his words settled on me. The entire empire, the eternal flames, the fear and security of millions. All of it was tied to this man, and now, somehow, it was tied to me. "I can't," I breathed, panic rising. "I'm a slave. I'm no one." "You are no one," he repeated, his eyes blazing, "and yet you are the only one. You are the shadow who did not break. You are the ghost who screamed." He stood, pulling me with him. I was weak, my legs trembling, but his grip was iron. He held me, steadying me as I swayed. "The council is in chaos," he said, his voice returning to the command I'd heard him use on Varya. "They think I am dead or dying. They smell weakness. They will tear each other apart for the throne. And they will learn tonight what true power is." He was still holding me, one arm securely around my waist. With his free hand, he gestured to the wall. The flames danced, and a section of the obsidian stone shimmered and dissolved, revealing a vast wardrobe within. Another gesture, and a set of clothes flew from the darkness and landed on the chair. They were not servants' rags. They were simple but fine, a tunic of deep black velvet, soft leather leggings, and boots. "Dress," he commanded. He released me, and I stumbled, but he let me find my own balance. As I shakily pulled on the clothes, they were warm, as if they'd been hanging near a hearth. He donned his own. His armor, his high-collared cloak, his gauntlets. Piece by piece, the broken man disappeared, and the Pyre King returned, a terrifying silhouette of black steel and burning gold. When I was done, I looked like a small, dark shadow beside him. He turned to me, his face once again the unreadable mask of the monarch. "They will try to hurt you." "Who?" "All of them," he said simply. "The court, the nobles, the assassins who sent that man. They will see you as a lever, a weakness, a way to control me." He stepped close, the heat from his armor warming my face. "They are wrong." He held out his gauntlet hand. Not in a gesture of command, but in an offering. My hand was so small, pale and trembling against the black, scorched metal. I looked from his hand to his burning, golden eyes. I remembered Varya's rules. Do not touch. Do not speak. Do not fear. I had broken them all. I placed my hand in his. His fingers closed around mine, a possessive, protective cage of steel. He pulled me to his side. They will see you not as my weakness, he whispered, his voice a promise of violence. They will see you as my strength. And they will learn to fear you as they fear me. He strode to the great steel door, pulling me with him. He didn't unbar it. He kicked it. The bar shattered. The door boomed open, slamming against the stone wall of the corridor. Mistress Varya was still there, huddled with two of the scorched guards, her face a mask of terror. When she saw the door fly open, she shrieked and fell back. Then she saw us. Her eyes went from Lucien in his full, terrifying regalia, to me, dressed in noble black, standing at his side, to our joined hands. Her mouth fell open. The color drained from her face, leaving a sickly, greenish-gray. It was the look of a woman whose entire world, whose every absolute rule, had just been incinerated before her very eyes. Vivarya, I stammered, my old fear of her rising instinctively. Mistress Vivarya, Lucien corrected, his voice like silk-wrapped steel. He never even looked at her. He kept walking, pulling me down the corridor. You will find new quarters for Lady Elen. In this tower, adjoining mine. Lady. Varya choked out. She will have a guard. She will have whatever she desires. And if any, he paused, his voice dropping to a lethal, fiery hiss, if any in this citadel show her anything less than the respect I show her, you will bring me their ashes in a jar. Am I understood? Yes. Yes, Your Majesty. At once. Varya scrambled to her feet, bowing so low her forehead nearly touched the floor. We didn't stop. We swept past her, past the trembling guards, a king and his impossible shadow. The citadel was in chaos. Servants were running, nobles in their masked finery were clustered in alcoves, whispering frantically. When they saw us, a wave of silence and shock followed in our wake. They saw their king, alive and terrible. And they saw the slave girl, branded and bound to him. Through the bond, I felt his cold, clear focus. I felt his contempt for the whispering nobles. And I felt the city beyond the walls, a great cold void of fear. The flames. I thought, my panic rising. They will return, his voice answered. I gasped and looked up at him, but his lips hadn't moved. He'd spoken to me. Through the bond. He glanced down, his golden eyes meeting mine. I told you, Elen. We are tethered. Now, be my anchor. They are about to see what happens when the Pyre King is truly inspired. He hauled open the great bronze doors to the council chamber. The room went silent. 100 masked nobles, all robed in gold and crimson, turned as one. They stared. They saw their god, who they thought was wounded. They saw the pyre mark on my neck. And they saw my hand, held firmly in his. I felt a wave of their hatred, their ambition, their shock. It washed over me, cold and sickening. I clutched Lucien's hand, my anchor in a sea of vipers. He raised our joined hands, and in the center of the dark cold chamber, his free hand, the scarred bare one, burst into a roaring, brilliant, white-hot flame. You were discussing my weakness, he roared, his voice and his fire silencing the entire world. Chapter 6: The Anchor and the Flame. The council chamber was a tomb. 100 masked nobles, the most powerful vipers in the empire, were frozen in a tableau of shock. Their hatred, their ambition, their terror. It was a frigid wave that crashed against me, and I felt it all through the string of fire that bound me to Lucien. I clutched his gauntlet, my knuckles white. His free hand, a blazing torch of white-hot fire, illuminated his face, a mask of pure, divine wrath. You were discussing my weakness, he roared, the flames in his hand pulsing with every word. A noble in a silver fox mask at the front of the crowd, Lord Valerius, was the first to find his voice. His was a slick, cold sound, like steel sliding from a velvet sheath. Majesty, he said, bowing low, his voice laced with venom. We rejoice in your recovery. But you bring a sickness into our sacred hall. The eternal flames died. They died when this thing, he pointed a jeweled finger at me, was brought into your domain. She is a creature of forbidden magic, a witch who doused your power. She is the source of your weakness, not your strength. A murmur of agreement rippled through the vipers. The law. One whispered. Forbidden magic. Punishable by the pyre. Lucien's fire flared, and he took a step forward, pulling me with him. She is my anchor, he snarled. Or she is the parasite that drains you. Valerius countered, his voice rising, emboldened. You are bound to her, Majesty. We all see it. But what if the bond is one of poison? What if she is the very assassin's bolt that struck your heart, simply in a different form? The law is absolute. Your law. Burn her. Burn her, and let us see if the flames of Calvaris return to their full glory. He was good. He was twisting the truth, preying on Lucien's deepest fear, that his curse, his fire, was a weakness. I felt Lucien's conflict through the bond. A spike of pure, cold doubt. His law, or me. His fire had faltered. The city had gone dark. Valerius smiled, sensing his victory. She has poisoned you. She is a weapon sent to destroy us. She must burn. Weapon. The word struck me, not as an insult, but as a key. The stress of the confrontation, the accusation, the raw hatred from 100 minds, it pressed on the bond. The string of fire thrummed, and the world fractured. It wasn't a vision. It was a memory. A memory that wasn't mine. I saw a ruin, a place of freezing, ancient stone under a black sky. The forbidden north. I saw Lord Valerius, his mask off, kneeling before a jagged shard of milky, glowing ice. I saw him praying to the old, fallen gods of that wasteland. He begged for a weapon to extinguish the Pyre King, a weapon of cold to undo the empire of fire. And then I saw me. Not me, but a shape of me. A vessel. An orphan girl with ash-blonde hair, marked by those same cold gods, filled with an ancient, icy magic. I was designed. I was a sleeper agent, a creature of ice magic, created to be the perfect, alluring void that would one day meet the Pyre King. The assassin wasn't meant to kill Lucien. He was meant to kill me, with a bolt of the same cold magic, activating the deeper power within me. He was meant to turn me into a magical black hole that would draw Lucien's fire in, bind to it, and then snuff it out forever. The auction. His chance sighting of me. It was all a trap. I was the weapon. Valerius was right. I stumbled, the force of the revelation tearing a gasp from my lips. I looked at Lucien, my eyes wide with the horror of what I was. He felt it. He saw the memory as it flooded me. His face, which had been a mask of rage, went utterly blank. The fire in his hand sputtered, shrinking from a torch to a mere trembling flicker. He looked at me, his golden eyes filled with a dawning, bottomless betrayal. The grief I had seen in his room was nothing compared to this. He let go of my hand. I was alone. You. He whispered, his voice breaking. It's true. You are the weapon. The council saw it. They saw the fire die. They saw their king recoil. They saw their victory. Lord Valerius laughed, a triumphant, ugly sound. See, your majesty? She is your doom. Seize the witch. To the pyre. The guards of the court, loyal to the council, drew their swords. They started to advance. Lucien just stood there, his fire almost out, staring at me, his heart, his anchor, the ultimate betrayal. I looked at him, the man who had knelt by my bed, the man who had called me his strength. I looked at the vipers, their faces hungry for my death and his ruin. I looked at the dying flame in his hand. And I made my choice. Yes, I said, my voice ringing out in the sudden silence. The guards hesitated. I am the weapon, I said, my chin rising. I turned to the council, my fear burning away, leaving only a cold, hard rage. You are right, Lord Valerius. The gods of the north did create me to be his end. I turned back to Lucien. His face was a mask of pure agony. They made me to be a void, I said to him, my voice softening. They designed me to be the ice that would kill your fire. I began to walk toward him, step by step. The guards raised their swords. But they made one mistake, I whispered, loud enough for only him to hear. They made me to be his, but they didn't count on him being mine. I stopped in front of him. I looked at his hand, at the pathetic, flickering flame that was all that was left of his power. "You are a fool, Lucien Vale," I said softly. "I know," he choked out. "You think this bond is a chain. You think it's a drain." I reached out, my small, pale hand moving toward his. "But you're wrong." "Elen, no," he whispered, his eyes wide with fear, thinking I would snuff out the last of his flame. "It's not a drain, you idiot," I said, my voice fierce, tears blurring my vision. "It's a conduit." I didn't just touch his hand. I seized it. I grabbed his bare, burning fist. The fire licked my skin, and I screamed, a raw sound of agony and ecstasy. But I didn't let go. "You are not alone in this cage," I hissed, pushing my own will, my own life, my own choice down the fiery string of the bond. "I am not your void. I am your anchor." I didn't try to extinguish the fire. I fed it. I took the ice magic I was made of, the cold, ancient power sleeping in my blood, and I burned it as fuel. I chose to burn with him. Burn. I screamed. Lucien's eyes snapped wide. He felt it. He felt my choice. He felt my sacrifice. And his fire answered. It didn't just return. It exploded. A supernova of pure, golden, controlled power erupted from our joined hands. It wasn't the red of rage or the white of grief. It was the brilliant, steady gold of a new dawn. A wave of heat and light rolled through the chamber, so powerful it blew the masks off the nobles' faces, sending them screaming and scrambling backward. The flames of Calvaris, in the chamber, in the citadel, in the city, roared back to life, 1,000 times brighter than before. "Lou," he breathed, his voice raw with awe. He stared at our joined hands, at the fire that was ours. It was no longer a curse. It was power. I was still burning. My hand was agony, but I didn't care. I smiled through my tears. "I choose you, Lucien. Even if it means burning." He looked at me, the Pyre King no more, the broken man no more. He was something new. He was ours. He raised my burned hand to his lips and kissed my knuckles, a vow of fealty. "Then we will burn together," he whispered. He turned, our hands still joined, our shared fire blazing, and he faced the cowering, unmasked council. "Lord Valerius," he said, his voice the calm, terrifying rumble of a living volcano. The guards of the court were on their knees, their swords melted. "You have confessed to treason, to consorting with fallen gods. The penalty is the pyre." Valerius, his face pale and slick with sweat, just stared, his mind broken. "But not my pyre," Lucien said, his lip curling. He looked at me, a fierce, proud smile touching his lips. "Take him to the dungeons. Let him freeze in the dark. His old guards can have what's left of him." The pyre guard, his guards, loyal to the true flame, moved as one. They seized Valerius, dragging him from the chamber. Lucien dismissed the rest of the council with a wave of his fiery hand. They fled, their reign of vipers over. We were alone, in the center of the great hall, our fire burning a steady golden light. He released my hand. The fire didn't go out. It retracted, sinking back into his skin, leaving his hand scarred, but no longer burning. The bond in my chest was a steady, warm, powerful thrum. He gently, tenderly, took my burned hand in both of his. The pain was fading, his magic already healing the skin, leaving it pale and new, just as his was. You chose me," he said, his voice thick with an emotion I had never heard from him. "Love. I will always choose you," I whispered, tracing the new silver scar on his palm. He pulled me against his chest, his arms wrapping around me, holding me as if I were the most precious thing in the world. I was no longer a ghost. I was his anchor. I was his queen. We stood there for a long time, in the heart of the citadel, in the center of the city whose flames now burned with our shared light. The empire had been built on fear and forbidden magic, a majestic but suffocating cage. But we were not our past. We were not what we were made to be. We were what we chose to be. The Pyre King, and the slave girl who became his fire. And so we stood, in the heart of the chamber that was no longer a cage, but our throne room. The eternal flames of Calvaris burned outside the windows, a brilliant, steady gold, no longer the color of Lucien's grief, but the color of our shared strength. I was no longer Elen, the ghost. I was Elen, the anchor. And he was no longer the monster in the tower. He was Lucian, my king, my partner, my flame. They had forged me in the cold wastelands of the north, a weapon of ice designed to be his end. But they never understood the nature of a true void. A void doesn't just destroy, it craves. It craves the one thing it does not have. And I had craved his fire. We had taken the destiny they had written for us in ice and ash, and together, we had rewritten it. Not as a tragedy, but as a vow. We would burn, yes, but we would burn together. Thank you so much for listening to the story of the Pyre King's slave, right here on Shadowsong Stories. If you too felt the pull of that fiery bond and believe that even the darkest shadows deserve a song, then you have found your home. To make sure you never miss another journey into the fire, please take a moment to like this video and subscribe to the channel. And don't forget to ring that notification bell, so you'll be the first to know when our next story begins. We would love to hear your voice. Comment below and tell us. What was your favorite moment of the bond between Elen and Lucian? Your support is the magic that brings these worlds to life. Until the next story, may your shadows be filled with song.